the discovery and recovery of the Dornier is of national and international importance.
The Battle of Britain commenced officially on about the 10th of July 1940 and ended on the 31st of October.
The events of that summer were critical to Britain's history and the history of the world.
The Dornier 17 was considered very highly at the beginning of the Second World War because it still had high performance, but it had a very small bomb load.
It was one of the main bombers employed by the Luftwaffe in the summer of 1940. It was also a very familiar sight in the sense that it had a quite distinctive silhouette. It was known as the flying pencil, and it was, in that sense, recognisable both in the air and from the ground.
The Defiant was a new idea on fighters. It carried a turret behind the pilot, which was the intention was to destroy bombers with that. The Dornier took off from its base at Saint-Tron in Belgium, which was the base for Kampfgeschwader 3, which this aircraft actually belonged to. It was one of a force of 9 aircraft that were scheduled to bomb RAF Manston on August 26, 1940. It was attacked by Defiant fighters, which disabled both engines.
It was shot down at a time of huge danger to this country.
It was airborne for approximately 2 hours before it was shot down. The pilot had no option but to force land because he had no power, so he made a controlled landing on the Goodwin Sands at 1340 hours, we believe. The museum first became aware of the Dornier in 2008, following a report from Wessex Archaeology, who did a sonar side scan of the wreck, following a report from a local diver who'd checked it out for a fisherman who'd snagged his nets on the wreck a year before.
On that particular day when we found the Dornier, we'd already just gone into the water to have a look at one obstruction, which just turned out to be a lump of timber, maybe from something from a warship during the 1700 storms.
A lot of our initial research was to confirm the identity of the aircraft and account for the crew.
It was confirmed as a Dornier in May 2010. We were concerned it may have been a later variant of the Dornier, which looks very similar, the Do17. But following a dive survey by West Archaeology, they confirmed various features on the aeroplane, which led me to understand that it definitely was a Dornier Do17Z.
None were known to have lasted the war. All those that had been shot down during the Battle of Britain have been recycled. So to find one in largely complete state, albeit on the seabed, was a very exciting and hugely sort of interesting opportunity for the museum.
If it remained in the seabed for much longer, the aircraft would have disintegrated totally.
The actual lifting operation, although it took only a matter of a few weeks, was the end of a very long process involving a lot of research, a lot of experiments in terms of finding a conservation methodology, and of course, and inevitably, a lot of fundraising.
I think it represents, in the 21st century, a link to the past, to a crucial period in British history, and I think by raising and preserving it, we can engage people with that particular period in British history in a much more meaningful way.
You have to look on the good side of things, that yes, we found it. Unfortunately, a lot of people would never have seen it until now, which is very good because it gives the people around the world really sort of like information that they can actually look at this massive object. Be it a war horse as such, it's still something that's very exciting, and it's very good for our own historic importance, really.
We knew that if we'd left it where it was, sand, sea and tide and time would have gradually destroyed it.
Is the last remaining opportunity to preserve this iconic piece of history.
The real challenge was, if we recovered it, could we conserve it and stop it deteriorating even faster? The work that Imperial College did was hugely important in assuring ourselves and the organisations such as English Heritage that we could not just raise the aircraft safely, but also conserve it and leave it for future generations.
Yeah, the immediate challenge when the aircraft came out of the water wasn't necessarily obvious to most people. What the aircraft had been short of underwater was oxygen. And as soon as we brought the aircraft from under the sea, we introduced it to oxygen, which was then a vital component in any acceleration of the corrosion.
I've been in the tunnels now since mid-June. The citric acid is starting to work. It's designed to help remove the marine deposits. Now it's done that, we're getting bare metal, but also citric acid will help to protect the aluminium underneath.
And the standard way of dealing with the chloride, that's the big issue, is to almost build a swimming pool and dip it in a swimming pool. The problem with that, it needs to be in there around 2 years, and it's difficult to take a look at your aircraft without lifting it out.
This is a pioneering conservation project because it allows us great access. We've got control over the spray nozzles, what's being sprayed on the aircraft, but also we can switch the system down. We can get inside, we can have a little look out for the corrosion, and if need be, treat those areas first.
Seeing the aircraft in its physical state, being able to touch it and go back to those events of 1940 has perhaps been the most exciting bit of the project. We'd seen photographs of the aircraft, we knew its history, we'd pieced together the story, but the reality of seeing it there, showing the damage of 70 years underwater, was nevertheless a hugely exciting moment. Being able to handle elements from the aircraft, including the shell cases from that combat in August 1940, has very much brought the story to life for me, and I hope our visitors are excited in much the same way.
But everyone really is quite taken aback by it. There are some who are really emotionally affected. We've had visitors from around the world, including Germany, and German visitors are really enthusiastic that we are taking care of this aircraft.
I like to think the Dornier will allow the events of the summer of 1940 to be brought to life, that they will allow visitors to think about what was involved, why it was so important that Britain fought, but also the price that was paid, not just in the air, but also on the ground. In telling the story of the Dornier, we're also telling the story of war and what it means to individuals. I think it's important that we remind visitors that 4 young men were involved in the destruction of the Dornier. 2 died and 2 became prisoners of war. Yet 70 years later, we're allies with Germany, we share common values and aspirations. So although the Battle of Britain was hugely important in defeating Nazi Germany and stopping their efforts to achieve world domination, And we need to remind ourselves that we were fighting for values of democracy and freedom, and that today Europe is united by those same shared values, and we are a lot better for it. So in looking to the past, we need to remember that today we are reconciled and we very much share a common future based on common values and common aspirations. And so the museum has a role both in terms of remembering and commemorating, but also in reconciliation and allowing visitors to understand that how important the past is in creating the world that we inhabit, and also why we must make every effort to avoid war in the future.